who sadly died in Ukraine last month, and I would also like, on behalf of our Defence Committee, to put on the record recognition for his service. So we've all read the final letter published at the request of his friends and family, and we were all deeply moved. So if you will, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for that welcome to all three of us. You rightly describe this committee as a critical friend, partisan about defence, but properly demanding of us in government. So can I place on record my and our appreciation for the work that you, your members and your staff do, for the constructive challenge that you offer to the work that we do in the Defence Department. Chair, I would like to mark this occasion before the committee just with a short tribute to Lance Corporal George Healey. As you say, he lost his life in Ukraine last month in the cause of peace and freedom. He served our nation with distinction and with honour. And in the words of one of his comrades who I spoke to and was with this month, he described him as the best bloke I've ever worked with. And when I met with President Zelensky a couple of weeks ago in Kyiv, I said I hoped that he would see the tragic loss of Corporal Healey as confirmation that we in Britain are ready to send our best to support his nation, that Britain continues to be Ukraine's closest, most reliable ally, and that we will stand with Ukraine for as long as it takes. And a secure Europe requires a strong Ukraine. And as Defence Secretary, I can confirm for this committee that our mission continues. Support the fight today, secure the peace tomorrow.
Thank you very much for that. And now I just want to kick off the questions, if I may, on the changing strategic context. Obviously, there's been a lot going on within the last few weeks, and whether that's with regards to the ongoing illegal invasion of Ukraine by Russia, and the Defence Committee was recently in Ukraine to see for ourselves what is happening on the ground. We've also seen for the first time a NATO ally threatening to annex NATO territory with regards to Greenland. I know that we've debated that within the chamber as well, not to mention the publication of the new US national security strategy and the defense national strategy as well. So with respect to all of that, and we all acknowledge that the US is our number one ally, but the sands, they are shifting. So for us, we were also very perturbed by the awful, hurtful comments with regards to our brave servicemen and women, 457 of whom perished, and we never thought a US president would be using such words. So with regards to all of that's going on, how do you think that's affected your own agenda with regards to the modernisation and transformation of our armed forces?
I think it has reinforced the case that we have made as a government since July 2024. I think it has reinforced the vision and imperative of transformation that was set out in last year's Strategic Defence Review. And in the context that we see and that you outline there, Mr. Chairman, we've certainly seen over recent months demands on defence rising, uncertainties increasing, and that doubles down, I think, on the way that as a government we have tried to approach this new era of threat and uncertainty, which is to fashion a new era for defence, but that's within the context of a government that recognises this is an era that requires hard power with greater investment in defence, stronger alliances, resetting our relations with key European allies, and sure diplomacy, which I think we've seen from the Prime Minister very clearly over the last fortnight in the midst of the concerns over Greenland, the new publications of the National Defence Strategy and previously the National Security Strategy in the US, and of course the increasing commitments that we are ready to make in support of Ukraine.
Will you be investing more in our own sovereign capabilities? Because a lot of us are concerned that we seem to be beholden to other allies and we do not have sufficient sovereign capability. And that, I think, was also part of the government's agenda to bolster the defence industrial base. You've often intimated that defence is an engine for growth. So what are you doing to ensure that we have more sovereign capability?
Will we be investing in more UK sovereign capability? Yes. An argument I've made for several years before the election. We declared at the election, when we were elected into government, that we would look to direct British defence investment first towards British-based firms, new jobs and innovation in this country. That's exactly what we have been doing, and over the last year you've seen over 1,100 major contracts let, 84% of that going to British-based firms, and in the last year you've seen a rise in the direct defence investment into British firms by over 6% above inflation.
And with regards to the Prime Minister, I know that he and the Chancellor will be visiting China. Now, can you confirm whether the Prime Minister is willing to sacrifice defence and security concerns at the altar of economic prosperity with the second largest economy in the world?
No, this is a Prime Minister that refuses to be drawn on what he sees as false binary choices, US or Europe, China trade or China concerns about security. In this complex world, particularly with a complex country like China, there are both enormous important trading opportunities with China, but there are also security concerns that are deep-rooted and continuing, and he will and we will balance both.
Yeah. I know Ian Roon wanted to comment on that.
Yeah, just on that capability, Secretary of State, the Armed Forces is suffering as the government retired the Puma in March 2025, leaving a medium-lift helicopter capability gap. So what is happening with awarding the medium-sized helicopter contract? As you say, there are thousands of British jobs and within the SME supply chain that are relying on this decision, and industry need the certainty now.
I understand that, Mr. Room. First of all, on the Puma, that was a decision I took last year. We are in a process. It is a big challenge for a new government to deal with what was a defence equipment programme that was heavily overcommitted, badly underfunded, and in many areas unsuited to the changing threats that we face. So as we make our defence investment decisions now to implement the vision of the Strategic Defence Review, there will be tough decisions that we need to make. And the Puma decision, like Watchkeeper, like HMS Bulwark and Albion, were all decisions that were long overdue, in my view, necessary decisions to help set up and reprioritise the defence budget for the future. On the new medium helicopter contract, that competitive process is still underway. We're considering that in the context of the wider investment plans and priorities that we are balancing at the moment. But I am acutely conscious.
As I understood it, there was only one successful candidate left in the contract bidding.
You will understand that there is a contract process underway, and that's not been completed yet. And I am deeply aware of just how important the skills of the workforce are, and the potential that they have to play a part in the sort of transformation that we need to see in the technology we develop, the manufacturing we produce, and the kit that we get much quicker into the hands of our warfighters for the future. And as you'd expect, both the Minister for Defence Readiness and Industry, Luke Pollard, and I are talking regularly and closely with the most senior Leonardo managers and directors, and I was with and discussing this with the Leonardo UK MD just last week.
And Secretary, talking of contracts, where are we with Ajax? Billions of pounds of public money invested, absolute shambles. Who's to blame, and what are you doing to resolve the situation?
So Luke Pollard, Minister for DRI, updated the House quite properly last week. I am furious that vital information was withheld.
Ministers were lied to.
It's clear we didn't have the full facts in the lead up to decisions about the initial operating capability. That IOC has been withdrawn. The Army is no longer in charge of this programme. A new Senior Responsible Officer, SRO, is now in place. I've been clear that we must back it or scrap it. The work is being done at the moment in order to put us in a position to make that decision. And whilst I really want to see the way that we procure for the future being more innovative, more rapid, first and foremost will be my concern for the safety and protection of our forces personnel.
Okay. Thomas.
Thank you. Secretary of State, in your answer to the Chair's first question, you mentioned several times the desire to invest in British-based companies and manufacturers in defence. In opposition, we spoke about Buy British. You spoke about Buy British, and that was the kind of Labour manifesto spoke about that as well. You're now using language that is British-based. Does that reflect a policy within the department to accept that it's too difficult sometimes to give contracts directly to British companies, and that there's an acceptance that if a foreign company from, let's say, Europe or America has a British subsidiary, we're now accepting that being British-based is sort of good enough to fall in with that kind of Buy British mentality?
3 points. First of all, Buy British is clearly a shorthand. What it signifies is a determination and a first focus on the role that defence can play as an engine for growth, creating new jobs, new opportunities, skills, backing good British-based businesses and innovators for the future. Second, it is not always possible to buy entirely British. There are certain capabilities that we need that are best produced by other countries or produced in combination and collaboration with industries in other countries, allied countries. And third, I think I would just encourage the committee and the public over the next 2 to 3 years to judge us on what we do, not just on what we say. I've given the committee already the figures in the first year in government for the way that we've increased defence investment into British firms. I've made a series of announcements that will lead to more British jobs and opportunities. In Ms Scrogham's constituency here, just since the last election, there are over 1,000 extra jobs in the Barrow shipyard because of the extra investment that we're putting into defence. And I'm announcing today a new programme to find the next UK defence tech unicorn in this country. That's a pot of up to £20 million that we will go after and invite those entrepreneurs that may not have done much or any business within defence before to come forward with the sort of innovation and ideas that they may have that we can help develop and support. And this is part of the Office for Small Business Growth opening its doors today. And it's, if you like, new ways of finding new entrants and new entrepreneurs in Britain for a programme that we're set to spend £2.5 billion in supporting directly in supporting small SMEs in the next each year. So this is Britain as our first focus. Our sovereign capability, as you put it, Mr. Thomas, as a priority. And fundamentally, it's also a recognition of what we can draw from Ukraine, which is that when a country is under threat or forced to fight, Its armed forces are only as strong as the industry and the innovators and the investors that stand behind them in their own country and with their close allies. And in this period where we face increasing threats, we face rising demands on defence, then there is a strong economic case for directing our investment to British-based firms. Okay. There is a strong security case for doing the same thing.
Okay, thank you. I'll just move on to ask you about the much delayed defence investment plan, and you said just now to judge us on what we do. You also alluded to the requirement, come any potential wartime scenario, to have a strong manufacturing base behind you that you can't just magic up. This defence investment plan, obviously it's been widely reported on, the kind of unconfirmed meetings that may or may not have happened in number 10. I think the kind of what we've heard from people within your department on record in this committee room is that it's a question of prioritisation. Can you give us a sense of, taken as read, that basically the SDR is a range of options and that there's not all the money in the world to do everything within it? What is your priority within the SDR to get funded within the investment plan?
So the SDR is a vision with a set of 62 recommendations, all of which we've accepted. It's a vision for transforming defence over a decade, and centre to it is the imperative to raise the levels of warfighting readiness in this country in order better to deter the increasing threats we face, and to work more closely with the allies that we may, in the end, need to fight with.
And in terms of prioritisation, is it more important for you, do you think, to make sure that Britain is ready to fight and win in a potential combat scenario in Eastern Europe next year or in the next 12 months? Or is the priority kind of further down the line into the 2030s?
Running throughout the whole of the vision and the programme for the next decade will be raising levels of warfighting readiness alongside, as the SDR laid out, making defence an engine for growth in this country. And those are exactly the fine judgments that we're making at the moment as part of this investment planning process. One that isn't simply about producing a new defence equipment programme and plan, which this committee and your predecessors have been so critical of under previous governments. This is the first line-by-line defence planning, almost a zero-based review, if you like, the department has carried out for 18 years. It is a challenge not just to deal with what was in place at the last election that was hugely overcommitted and underfunded, and in many areas not suited to the challenges that we face. But it is also one that will not just deal with the capabilities, it will deal with the infrastructure, it will deal with our people. I'm just
trying to get a sense of, when you've got these teams and the quad working for you and trying to get this dip ready and something happened and it got delayed, your staff, so NAD and CDS, on record here, said it was a question of prioritisations and that they weren't able to give that prioritisation, they worked to it. Are you able to give us any sense of what the priority is, aside from the very big ticket items of saying readiness as a concept and growth, an engine for growth as a concept, which no one across any political spectrum, well, maybe not quite, but most people wouldn't disagree with? Are you
Mr. Thomas, those were not the two lodestars that you saw driving defence decisions under the last government. Was set out. We set this out in the manifesto that you and I were elected on. We set this out as a new government, and when we've captured it in this first of its kind ever strategic defence review published last year, and it is that strategic defence review which sets out both the vision and the priorities for transformation that you will see reflected in the defence investment planning, because this is the way that we put the SDR into practice over the next decade.
Are you able to give any sense more of drive that you give people within the department to work towards, other than very big ticket strategy items like readiness as a kind of big concept and engine for growth as a big concept? For example, do you say to them, I want to be absolutely ready should we have to deploy people in 6 months' time? I want to know that they've got the most advanced, up-to-date, contemporary technologies to fight with. And that's the most important thing to me. And then we can worry about very large platform procurement that will have effect in 20 years' time after that. Or is it the other way around? And you say, we need to make sure that we're ready for 10, 15 years' time, and we can take a bit of risk in the next year.
With respect, those are quite narrow questions. You asked me for priorities. I'm saying to you those are set out quite clearly in the Strategic Defence Review, including in the 62 recommendations we've accepted. You asked me whether I can evidence any of the priorities. I can do that with the actions and decisions we've already taken.
I don't think 62 recommendations, you can't have 62 priorities.
Well, hang on. In the last 3 months, we have confirmed a decade-long £9 billion injection and a new defence housing strategy. We did the first stage of the legislation for a new housing service yesterday in the House. That was a major priority that goes beyond the sort of capabilities that have always been looked at in the past. But in my view, and the SDR's vision, is fundamental to raising morale, helping deal with the recruitment and retention crisis we inherited from 14 years of failure on all those fronts, but fundamentally also helping equip our forces to be more flexible, more settled, more able to fight better in the future. I could point you to the military intelligence service and the counterintelligence unit that we've set up and recently launched. I could point you also to the electromagnetic and cyber warfare command that has been established. All recommendations in the SDR regarded as important enough to act now. So if you want an indication of the sort of priorities, I refer you, I'm afraid, back to that SDR, the recommendations and the imperatives that run throughout that, because that's what we will follow.
It's good,
and the Defence
to hear about
Investment
those
Plan will be
particular
the implementation
priorities
of that SDR.
Yeah, I mean, it's good to hear about those particular priorities with the SDR, but it said that the Prime Minister was livid when he found out that the Strategic Defence Review wasn't fully costed, and that's why the Times has reported that there's apparently a £28 billion shortfall. Do you agree with that assessment? Can you corroborate that? And what cuts are you planning in capabilities in order to meet the rest of the prioritisations within the Strategic Defence Review?
I would just say to you, Mr. Chairman, and you've been around long enough to know not to take at face value what you read in the press.
Those were false.
The SDR, when it was completed and published, was fully affordable within the financial commitments that we made. That was confirmed, including by the Prime Minister when he published it. You will know that there is £6 billion extra in the defence budget this year compared to last year. You will know, this committee above all, that we will be spending, as things are, £270 billion in this Parliament alone. And so the challenge for us, like any organisation, is to make sure that we are directing that investment to the things that matter most. We're doing it in a way that allows us to control and manage our budgets for the future, because that's exactly what the taxpayer would expect of us.
Yeah, right. Jesse Norman.
Thank you very much indeed. Just a quick question. You've said, Secretary of State, that you absolutely recognise the importance of this committee as a critical friend of the MOD, and I think you also recognise that we treat all information we've been given in confidence. There have been no leaks of any kind that I'm aware of, certainly from this committee. But the amount of information we've had from MOD over the years has gone down rather than up. So in the context of assisting us in our work, would you be willing to let us have the annual budget cycle documents that MOD produces so that we can scrutinise some of the work that you're doing and have a better sense of the priorities that you have come to?
Well, look, this committee will receive the information it's traditionally had on budgeting, annual reports and accounts, and you'll be able to take me to task, the new Permanent Secretary to task, on the areas that you want to cross-examine.
Can I just add, for just To aid the committee, because I know a previous Secretary of State raised this in a hearing, I think, last week. As part of defence reform, we're actually changing our approach to how we manage the budget in MOD, and the annual budget cycle to which you're referring was under the sort of the previous regime based on the annual update to deliver defence plan. We are moving our approach to a strategic planning cycle that actually brings together the strategy and the finances in a single cycle. And this will help us improve our alignment of resources and priorities. It's a significant change. It'll be moving away, and perhaps there'll be less focus on those sort of isolated budgeting rounds to the integrated multi-year approach. That's why the Defence Investment Plan is going to be at the heart of that. But just to help the committee, it's worth noting we're shifting our approach to align with defence reform.
Thank you. That's very helpful, and we'll be able to judge it when we've got the details. Will you commit to briefing the committee staff so that we're completely on top of the technicalities of that, but also letting us have a baseline so that we can then judge what progress you make against your strategic priorities under that new schema?
We'll set out the information in the Defence Investment Plan. I'm very happy to brief the committee on how we've constructed our approach, but we will of course be will of course provide information that the committee need as MOD does in the past and as Parliament requires.
But you said you can't do it as the past because you've changed the system. So I'm asking, can we then have a benchmark so that we know what basis you're starting from with this new system that you've developed?
Well, look, first of all, we will set a new benchmark that will be shared with the committee. But I think, to be fair to us, Mr. Chairman, when the committee has asked for briefings in private and with a degree of confidentiality, we've always tried to respond, and you have been public and positive about the way that we have been able to do that to this committee in a way that there were complaints about that the previous committee didn't get that information. And so if it is a briefing that you're looking for, Mr. Norman, and as a committee, on the way that we are trying to change the what the Permanent Secretary describes as the strategic decision-taking cycle, then of course we will do that.
Briefings would be great. The trouble is that we won't get institutional memory and accountability if we don't have documents showing what the basis was when you started and how you're going to work out the numbers. And then in a year's time or 2 years' time, we can look back and say, well, that was the baseline, this is how it changed, and that was what the system was. So we do need some documentary basis for what you're deciding as you go. We can have it in retrospect, but we must have some kind of grip as a committee as to what's actually going on.
Of course.
I think that's,
well, you're a one-man institutional memory for this committee, if I may say so, Mr.
I wish that was true, and certainly unreliable if so.
Yeah. Michelle Scroggle.
Thank you. If we can just go back to the Defence Investment Plan. Obviously, it's wildly awaited with speculation on why we're waiting so long to see it, but that aside, my concern is businesses. So we've got a fairly large supply chain. Many of those businesses rely on the orders coming through. They don't survive on hints and ideas on what might come through. Talking to businesses recently, there are businesses out there that are shedding staff. Now, that is the opposite of what we were looking for at the moment, but they're doing that because they don't know what signals are going to turn into actual orders. So can you tell me what we're doing to protect those businesses while they're waiting for this information to feed through, whether it's next week, next month, spring, with it, they need that information. So what are we doing to make sure that they have the support they need now?
So I understand those concerns that businesses sometimes voice. I would just say that this is in the context of a greater certainty that this sector has not had. There is no one working in the defence industry today who has known they were working in the certain decade of rising defence spending ahead. No one working within defence industry that has the certainty of the vision within which our priorities and our decisions will be taken with the Strategic Defence Review. And I would just say confirmation of important decisions will be part of the Defence Investment Plan. But that is not stopping us getting on with a good deal of the contracts needed, the action that's required. And I said to the committee earlier on that over the last year or so, we have let over 1,100 major contracts. And just last week, I was in Edinburgh with Leonardo, announcing a £450 million contract to upgrade our Typhoon jets. That is investment decisions now, straight into the manufacturing of the new radars. And that isn't just about our own, making our own Typhoon fleet more lethal, better able to outmaneuver and have the edge on adversaries. That's about reinforcing the ability for us to make British-made Typhoons attractive to other countries as well. And as a proof of that, I would just say to you, look at the £8 billion deal we agreed with Turkey for Typhoons in the autumn last year. It was part of more than £20 billion of a boost to British defence industries that we won in exports in the last year alone. That's a record level since records began nearly 40 years ago.
Thank you very much. Calvin Bailey.
Thanks very much. Sorry, I'm going to take you back a few steps. So you arrived in government, the equipment plan is there waiting for you with what the MOD put as between 7 and 29 billion out of whack. NAO reckons it's about 16 to 17 billion out of phase. Why wasn't that formally resolved or recognised prior to the SDR process commencing?
Sorry, you're talking about the equipment plan produced under the last government?
2020.
Why on earth would we continue with something that was badly flawed as that? It wasn't just that the NAO regarded it as underfunded and unlikely to be delivered. It also pointed out that the whole way that Defence previously was putting that together wasn't even consistent between the three services. Now, we new government, set of new strategic priorities for the UK, a strategic shift, if you like, just like the US is undergoing some sort of strategic shift. With the UK, it was a recognition that we had to make our overriding defence strategy and NATO first strategy, that we had to do alongside other European allies more lifting, heavy lifting within NATO, that we had to step up our support for Ukraine, and that we had to build a new deal for European security within NATO. And that's what we've been doing. Now, frankly, even when you come to the equipment plan, before you come to the detail that I've touched on before about it being overcommitted and underfunded, it was unsuited to the threats we face. It wasn't suited to the sort of transformation required or the rapidly accelerating technological change that you, Mr. Bailey, are really well on top of and an expert on. We have to do things differently.
That I recognise. My question was, why wasn't this up front? So some of us sat on the Public Accounts Committee to try and get after the detail of this discussion of that business, and we didn't have a baselining in the way that Mr. Norman put out. That would have been a really useful thing, because it would have been quite clear the programmes or the elements of the programme which just weren't funded and were pie in the sky in the first instance. And so arriving in the SDR process, there is an effort to not compound that error, even though we didn't have the necessary public discussion to understand just how bad things were anyway. But in attempting to not compound the error, the TORs for the SDR said that the review will identify where reprioritisation of roles, capabilities, activities and support will be made in the current defence programme. That's correct, am I not?
Yes.
Brilliant. Okay, because last week CDS was unclear that was the case, and just to kind of link, and I know we'll talk about the ABC later, that is entirely contrary to how your new design works. It's very definitely that CDS should be providing some of that prioritisation internally to you. So the question I have is, who took the decision to remove the reprioritisation from the SDR? When was that decision made, and under what rationale?
Sorry, I'm actually, you've lost me.
Okay.
The SDR was a reset of this country's strategic defence and security approach. It was done so to reflect the the framework of priorities that we'd set out in our manifesto.
With the greatest respect, Secretary of State, my point was that in the TORs, the reprioritisation was part of the activity, and at some point, and we've observed this into our two committee, and I can draw out the quotes, when the team first came out in front of us, I think it was Lord Robertson first said, like, that's part of what we are being asked to do, and then when they came back, General Barron said, actually, I don't have to worry about this, like, that's for them to do. When between those two meetings was that changed? Under what rationale did that change come about?
I may be a bit slow, but I'm still not following you. Of course, the Strategic Defence Review was a review and a resetting of Britain's strategic priorities. We left behind, and we said at the election we would, the sort of bombast of a global Britain under Boris Johnson. We were recognising the increasing threats. We were recognising that America was rightly requiring European nations to step up and do more within NATO. And we were recognising that a Britain that burnt its relations, sometimes willfully so in the Brexit process, had left Britain without the strength of alliances that we need for the future, which is why since the election you've seen the Trinity House Agreement with Germany that wasn't there before, you've seen a reboot of the Lancaster House Agreement with France, you've seen the Luna House Agreement with Norway, all with strategic security and defence relations at their heart, but also big economic opportunities
and with,
as well. For
with the greatest respect, all of those things are wonderful, but they are built on the foundations of a £7 to £29 billion 10-year plan. So it was already running into the programme. So a year in, you already been working in the annual budget cycles, which would have been prefaced on that flawed plan. The SDR then arrives and it adds all this new ambition, and we don't know at which point the SDR team was told not to apply that ambition within the SDR. We don't know why, and there is no evidence of reprioritisation after the SDR. So the question again, at which point was the prioritisation removed from the SDR team?
I'm still failing to understand your question, and Chair, perhaps I could just say, if you need to, can you write to me on this?
My friend Emily will be able to advise on that.
I'm sorry, Mr. Bailey, I'm just not following what you're saying.
All right,
the SDR team.
Emma, go on.
Sorry, afternoon all. Secretary of State, I think if I can try and simplify it, because I do tend to speak quite bluntly and straight, the SDR was supposed to identify reprioritisation, but it didn't. The reviewers were clear with us that that had been removed. So why did the SDR should go from its terms of reference to say it should identify what defence should and should no longer do to then changing? Is what we're trying to understand here. Is that fair, Calvin?
There are no down arrows. The SDR doesn't say what it isn't going to do. So and then more worryingly, you also have programmes in there that you knew were unfunded, but your language, they're heavily overcommitted and badly underfunded decisions. And there is no evidence that they've been removed. So we've tried to ask in the question prior to me, like, what were those things? But what's most important is, where was the decision made to not do that, and where?
The Strategic Defence Review was always a strategic review. It wasn't there to make the detailed investment decisions. That's my job, that's our job, that's the job we're now doing to implement the Strategic Defence Review through the Defence Investment planning process. What it did do was recognise that there were priorities that the previous government might have pursued, reflected in the defence programme and the programme of record. For instance, a global Britain role. For instance, kit that just wasn't recognising the very rapid technological change. And it's one of the reasons that I made those decisions I referred to earlier, while the SDR review was going on things like Watchkeeper, on Bulwark, on Albion, on Puma. Because we do and we have to make disinvestment decisions as well as investment decisions. But those are for us, not for the strategic reviewers.
what you're saying doesn't fit with the terms of reference from the SDR. I'm looking at them now, and what you're saying doesn't align with the actual terms of reference. And what myself and Calvin are trying to understand is what changed from the terms of reference to the SDR being produced.
The work of the SDR, and it worked within the terms of reference, it worked within the financial envelope it was given, it produced the Strategic Defence Review. You can take a view about whether it fully met its terms of reference or not. It was a fundamental review. It was the first of its kind done in that way. It had an extraordinary input of challenge and review from experts right across the field, as well as being led by the 3 independent reviewers. It worked very closely with Defence in order to come to its conclusions. The job now for me as Defence Secretary in the Defence Department is to take that vision, which we've accepted, to take the recommendations, which we've accepted, and put that into practice. We're doing that already, and we have done in the first 6 months since the Strategic Defence Review in a number of areas. And we've got big decisions that we're in the process of taking, and we're working flat out to complete the DIP process, because that's the way that we implement, not just for this Parliament, but for the decade that they set out the vision for.
Right. Obviously, there seems to be some misunderstanding. We want to bring this to a conclusion.
Bring it to a close. Thank you. The reason why this is important is that in the previous Healey review in the late 60s, those programmes that entered an unaffordable defence plan came under immense pressure because of the ability of the government to separate them. The one that was most notable was the cancellation of the TSR2. The concern now is that GCAP, which will occupy the greater part of the programme, now doesn't have, we don't have adequate assurance or visibility of how that entered or exits the GCAP, the SDR. So can you provide us some assurance that that programme remains a valid and programme that we will see in the Defence Investment Plan?
I'm still working on GCAP. I'm absolutely determined that the momentum of the programme is maintained. I've been in communication with both the Italian and Japanese defence ministers within the last 24 hours. But to come to this, what I think is a really important point that you're making here, this investment plan, the plan for defence for this Parliament and this the next decade will be affordable, because it's been one of the fundamental flaws of the way that previous governments recently have done their defence planning, done their equipment plans, and this will be affordable. It will reflect the priorities and the strategy vision set out in the SDR. And I am determined, and I see it as my job, to make sure that when we make those commitments, when we make those decisions, they are deliverable, and that's what we do.
Yeah, Secretary, what I would suggest is the issue around reprioritisation, it's a key one in terms of reference. Perhaps you could write to the committee to clarify so that we can clear any misunderstandings that there may be on this particular issue. I do want to move on from the Defence Investment Plan. I think there are 3 very quick supplementaries before I want to move on to defence reform. I've got Mike Martin, Ian Room and Emma Liu. Mike Martin.
Thanks, Chair. Secretary of State, I can see that you want to keep this big picture. So following in that theme, I noticed across the quads you've got 4 budget holders, and all of their spend is categorised. It's either invest, or it's readiness, or it's operate, and that seems like a very sensible innovation. Could you tell me the balance or percentages of how departmental spend is split between those 3 categories of invest, readiness and operate?
Between the Perm Secretary and I, we can give you a sort of feel for that. I don't know if this takes us into the reform territory, but you're quite right. I mean, part of the most important elements of the reform, I mean, we've got 4 budget holders instead of 10. We've got 1 investment budget.
Because I know we're short of time.
And if you look at the budget of the NAD Group, for instance, which holds that investment budget, we've actually created, as part of the reforms now, a FTSE 100 scale company just within that NAD Group.
Just what would the percentages be across those 3?
I'm very happy to share that with you. I think the invest budget is essentially very close to the CDL budget, which this year is £23.2 billion of £62.2 billion. The readiness and run budget and the operations budget are very close to the Ardale budget, which is £38.9 billion. But let me get you a note on the precise.
I think that would be very good.
That's is the run readiness and the operate.
So they come together.
And the operate
okay.
come together. Is broadly the position.
And just super quickly,
that's all public information.
Is that going to be different in 12 months' time, 24 months' time, 5 years' time? Do we see that
well, we've not
shifting?
made. While we do have obviously a settlement for Cedel and Ardale, the splits within the budget are decisions that we will need to make in the usual way alongside the investment plan. We do have some of those publicly information on how our Cedel budget in particular is rising. We've alluded to some of the numbers. It is scheduled to rise to £31.5 billion by 2028-29.
So that shift is going to move from less investment, more operations.
More investment. Proportionally, Cedel is a greater proportion of the budget on the settlement that the department has.
Ian Rowe.
Secretary of State, could I ask regarding the MOD budget, have you announced any in-year savings? And if so, are you diverting money away from our people at the expense of big, shiny capabilities? I'm talking about medical services, especially because we all focus on programmes, Typhoon, GCAP, AUKUS, but I never hear anything said about the medical services within the armed forces. And from our experience on some of the inquiries I'm picking up, that actually we're not investing enough in the medical capabilities within our own armed forces. So could you just tell us what your plans are there?
The answer to your question, short answer, is no and no. The budget this year is bigger, £6 billion bigger than it was last year, so we're spending more. But of course, as you'd expect, as the public would expect, we're trying to make sure that we spend that well, that it reflects the priorities and rising pressures on defence at the moment. And where we can, we're giving the priority to the sort of operational demands and options that are being required of defence. That's increased commitment, preparing for what we hope will be a peace in Ukraine. It's potential options for stepping up action on shadow shipping. It is continuing, as you've seen in the
medical
last...
services in particular.
I'm going to ask General Naismith perhaps to add on. No to savings. We're making decisions about controlling and managing our budgets, as you would expect us to do within the year, and no to prioritising shiny big platforms over the operations and the concerns to put the people, the men and women in uniform, at the heart of our defence plans.
Right, brilliant. Thank you. Oh, General, just very briefly on that.
I was just going to do General. Reinforcing fires in terms of under defence reform. I'm now the Armed Forces people person. I think I said that at the last time we met. And whilst we go through some of our managing the in-year budget, the Secretary of State holds us to account very strongly around protecting some of our people measures, as you might have described them, for which I'm very grateful as the Armed Forces people person.
Thank you very much. I've got Emma Liu very briefly, and then also very briefly Lincoln Job.
Thanks, Chair. Just a quick one from me, and it might seem a bit obvious, but since the government accepted all 62 of the recommendations in the SDR, and that included 12 new F-35As, the 12 SSN AUKUS nuclear subs, 6 munitions factories, 6 billion in munitions procurement, 7,000 long-range missiles, and 1 billion for homeland air defence. Will they all be in the Defence Investment Plan or not?
They will be part of what we plan to deliver over the next decade, which is, of course, the period of the SDR.
So they'll be in the Defence Investment Plan?
So they will be part of what we look to pursue over the next decade, because we want to implement those parts of the SDR.
Is the money there for all of those things, Secretary of State? Because that's a lot of costly items.
So when you look at the 270 billion we'll be spending in this Parliament, the fact we'll hit 3% in the next Parliament, that we've made a commitment, like the other 31 allies as members of NATO, to 3.5% on defence by 2035. This gives us that certain decade of rising defence spending, which I talked about to Ms Scroggum earlier on, and it allows us to plan within that for the way that we pace and prioritise the investments that we make.
I think what I'm trying to pin you down on, Secretary of State, and I know this, is that you accepted those recommendations, so are they going to happen? Are those what I've read, the list of things that I've just read out there, are they going to happen?
Well, they're not all going to happen in the first year. They can't all happen in the first year. But the SDR was a vision and essentially an outlined strategic plan for the next decade, and that's what we will pursue.
Brilliant. I do want to move on to defence reform with Mike Martin after this very quick supplementary from Lincoln Jopp.
Very quick one. General, whose job is it to protect the moral component of fighting power?
So it's the service chiefs to the chief, well, all of the service chiefs and Commander CSOC as part of the Chiefs Committee.
Thank you. Brilliant. All right, on to defence reform then with Mike Martin.
Thanks, Chair. Secretary of State, what does success look like for defence reform? We're probably a year, 18 months into it now.